Why do some people effortlessly connect while others struggle? The secret isn't what you say, it's how you say it. In Supercommunicators, Charles Duhigg reveals the science of persuasion, trust, and influence. Master these skills, and you'll transform how you connect with anyone. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. The Matching Principle. The first chapter of Supercommunicators introduces the idea that successful communication is rooted in alignment, what Charles Duhigg calls the matching principle. The chapter begins with the story of Jim Lawler, a CIA case officer tasked with recruiting spies. Lawler initially struggled because he believed persuasion was about manipulation and deception. However, he later realized that the key to building trust and meaningful relationships was not trickery, but understanding the emotional and psychological needs of others. Duhigg explores how effective communication depends on matching the conversational approach to the other person's mindset. He references research showing that humans instinctively seek resonance in conversations. Subconscious signals, such as mirroring body language or adjusting speech patterns, indicate alignment and connection. This phenomenon is backed by neuroscience studies on neural entrainment, where individuals in deep conversation synchronize their brainwaves. The chapter underscores that when people feel understood, they are more likely to open up and engage in meaningful discussions. The book argues that misalignment in conversations, where one person approaches a dialogue emotionally while the other remains strictly logical, leads to friction and misunderstanding. Duhigg introduces the three types of conversations. What's this really about? How do we feel? And who are we? Each of these conversation types serves a different function, and successful communicators recognize which one is needed in a given situation. The chapter concludes with a discussion of practical techniques to improve alignment, such as active listening, paraphrasing, and asking clarifying questions. Duhigg emphasizes that mastering the matching principle allows individuals to navigate complex conversations, whether in personal relationships, business negotiations, or high-stakes diplomatic discussions. By learning to recognize the type of conversation taking place and adapting accordingly, anyone can enhance their communication skills and foster deeper connections. Chapter 2. Every conversation is a negotiation. In the second chapter, Duhigg explores the idea that all conversations, even casual ones, involve an element of negotiation. He illustrates this point through the case of Wisconsin versus Leroy Reed, a real-life trial in which jurors had to deliberate over the guilt of a man with limited cognitive ability. The jury's discussions revealed that people often enter conversations with different goals and expectations, which must be reconciled for a productive exchange to occur. Duhigg explains that every conversation has an implicit structure in which participants must decide what the discussion is truly about and how it will unfold. He argues that the most effective communicators are those who recognize the unspoken rules governing a conversation and strategically navigate them. Drawing on research in behavioral psychology and conflict resolution, the chapter highlights how individuals unconsciously negotiate not only over facts, but also over emotions, perceptions, and power dynamics. The book introduces the concept of interest-based bargaining, an approach commonly used in diplomacy and high-stakes business deals. Rather than treating conversations as win-lose scenarios, skilled communicators seek solutions that expand the pool of available options, making it possible for all parties to benefit. The chapter provides real-world examples, including negotiation strategies used by FBI hostage negotiators, labor union mediators, and marriage counselors, showing how the same principles apply in vastly different contexts. Duhigg also explains that emotions play a crucial role in conversational negotiations. He discusses studies demonstrating that people are more likely to agree with someone they like and trust, even when their logical arguments are weak. Therefore, building rapport and demonstrating empathy are often more important than simply presenting facts. The chapter emphasizes that great communicators recognize these dynamics and use them to shape discussions in ways that foster understanding and cooperation. The chapter concludes with actionable advice on improving negotiation skills in everyday conversations. Duhigg suggests techniques such as framing discussions around shared interests, using open-ended questions, and managing emotions to create a positive conversational environment. By understanding that every interaction involves subtle negotiations, readers can become more persuasive and effective communicators in both personal and professional settings. Chapter 3. The Listening Cure. This chapter explores the transformative power of listening and how it influences our interactions, decision-making, and relationships. The author uses the example of a high-stakes hedge fund meeting where investors seek to gain an edge by understanding subtle cues in conversation. One such investor, who had lost millions due to a failure in picking up on micro-expressions and shifts in tone, realizes that his problem was not in analyzing data, but in failing to listen properly. Listening, Duhigg explains, is not just about hearing words, it's about understanding what's left unsaid. The chapter introduces research from psychology professor Nicholas Epley, who has studied how people perceive and misperceive each other's thoughts. He argues that deep listening is a rare skill, often overshadowed by our tendency to assume we know what others mean. Epley's research suggests that many misunderstandings occur not because people fail to communicate, but because they fail to listen with genuine curiosity. Duhigg delves into the psychological mechanisms behind effective listening. He describes the importance of perspective taking, where an individual actively seeks to understand another person's emotions and intentions without projecting their own assumptions. This contrasts with perspective getting, a more effective method that relies on asking the right questions and paying attention to subtle cues. The author argues that most people assume they can infer emotions correctly, but in reality, they often miss critical context clues. One of the key insights in this chapter is that great listeners create a sense of psychological safety, encouraging others to open up. Duhigg references studies showing that individuals who feel truly heard are more likely to share honest thoughts and emotions. He connects this to business, politics, and personal relationships, emphasizing that powerful communication begins with powerful listening. Finally, the chapter offers practical strategies to develop listening skills, including active listening, mirroring emotions, and using pauses effectively. The author suggests that by mastering the art of listening, individuals can become more influential, deepen their relationships, and even gain a competitive advantage in professional settings. Chapter 4. How do you hear emotions? No one says aloud. This chapter focuses on the nuances of emotional communication and how people often fail to recognize what others are feeling. Duhigg illustrates this concept with a story from The Big Bang Theory, a television show that successfully uses nonverbal cues and tonal shifts to convey emotions. He argues that great communicators don't just listen to words, they listen to emotions embedded in those words. Duhigg explains how emotions shape conversations, often dictating their direction more than logic or facts. He introduces the concept of emotional entrainment, a process where people subconsciously match the emotions of those around them. This phenomenon is seen in everything from everyday conversations to high-stakes negotiations, where reading emotional undercurrents can mean the difference between success and failure. The author discusses scientific studies on how people express and perceive emotions. He references Daniel Goleman's research on emotional intelligence, emphasizing that people with high EQ, emotional intelligence, can detect subtle changes in voice pitch, facial expressions, and body language. However, he warns that many individuals misinterpret emotions because they rely on stereotypes or personal biases rather than true observation. Duhigg provides a compelling example of how misunderstanding emotions can lead to conflict. He recounts a legal case where a defendant's inability to express remorse in a culturally expected way led to a harsher sentence. This highlights how our ability to hear unspoken emotions is crucial not only in personal interactions, but also in institutional settings. To improve emotional perception, Duhigg suggests focusing on vocal cues, body language, and the context of a conversation. He encourages using validation techniques, acknowledging the other person's emotions without immediately offering solutions. He also stresses the power of silence, arguing that sometimes the best way to understand someone is to give them space to express themselves fully. The chapter concludes by reinforcing the idea that communication is not just about talking, it's about deeply understanding the emotions that drive human interaction. By honing the ability to hear unspoken emotions, individuals can build stronger connections, resolve conflicts more effectively, and become more persuasive communicators. Chapter 5. Connecting amid conflict. This chapter explores the complexity of engaging in meaningful conversations with people who hold opposing views, particularly in emotionally charged or politically divisive contexts. The author introduces the story of a woman who, after a traumatic school lockdown experience, becomes a prominent advocate for gun control. However, she finds herself struggling to engage in productive conversations with gun rights supporters, often leading to frustration and hostility rather than understanding. Duhigg emphasizes that conflict-driven conversations tend to follow predictable patterns. People enter discussions expecting confrontation and therefore act defensively, reinforcing division rather than fostering connection. The chapter argues that meaningful dialogue can only occur when individuals recognize the emotions and values underlying the other person's beliefs. The woman's experience demonstrates how deeply ingrained narratives shape perceptions, making it difficult for people on opposite sides to engage constructively. A central concept in this chapter is the importance of acknowledging shared concerns rather than immediately debating solutions. When discussing controversial topics, people often focus on arguing policies or facts while ignoring the emotions that drive the discussion. For instance, in the case of gun control, one side may see it as a safety issue, while the other sees it as a matter of personal freedom. Duhigg explains that successful communicators, what he calls supercommunicators, understand that before debating solutions, they must first recognize the emotional motivations behind a person's stance. The chapter also introduces strategies for diffusing tension and creating an environment where both parties feel heard. One key technique is the use of open-ended questions that encourage deeper reflection rather than fueling defensiveness. For example, instead of asking a gun rights advocate, "Why do you support weapons that cause mass shootings?" which immediately places the person on the defensive, a more productive question might be, "What experiences have shaped your views on gun ownership?" By framing questions in a way that encourages storytelling rather than confrontation, individuals can find common ground and create opportunities for genuine connection. Additionally, the chapter highlights research on group identity and how people tend to align with their tribe in conflicts. Duhigg discusses studies showing that when individuals feel their identity is under attack, they are less likely to consider opposing viewpoints, even in the face of compelling evidence. The takeaway is that effective communicators avoid directly challenging someone's core identity. Instead, they focus on fostering trust and highlighting shared concerns, allowing for more open and constructive dialogue. By the end of the chapter, Duhigg presents examples of individuals who have successfully bridged divides, even on highly polarized issues. He argues that while agreement may not always be possible, connection and mutual understanding are achievable goals. The key lies in approaching conversations with curiosity, emotional intelligence, and a willingness to understand rather than persuade. By applying these principles, individuals can navigate difficult discussions more effectively, fostering progress rather than deepening division. Chapter 6. Our social identities shape our worlds. This chapter delves into the profound impact that social identity has on the way people communicate and interpret the world. Duhigg uses the example of vaccine hesitancy as a case study, illustrating how deeply personal and collective identities influence beliefs and decision-making. He introduces a woman who initially resisted vaccines due to distrust of the medical system, but later changed her stance after engaging in meaningful conversations with trusted members of her community. The chapter explains that people do not form opinions in isolation. Rather, they are shaped by the groups they identify with, whether political, cultural, religious, or professional. These identities create cognitive filters that influence what information people accept or reject. Duhigg presents research showing that when a belief is closely tied to a person's social identity, challenging that belief directly often backfires, reinforcing their stance rather than changing it. A major theme of the chapter is that persuasion is not about presenting facts alone. It is about understanding how people integrate those facts into their worldview. The author introduces studies showing that people are more likely to change their minds when information comes from someone they trust within their social group rather than an outsider. This is why health campaigns that rely solely on expert recommendations often fail, because people trust those who share their values and experiences more than they trust institutional authority figures. Duhigg introduces the concept of identity affirmation as a powerful tool for influencing opinions. Instead of challenging someone's stance head-on, communicators can affirm the person's core values and then introduce new information in a way that aligns with those values. For example, rather than telling an anti-vaccine advocate that they are wrong, a more effective approach might be to acknowledge their desire to protect their family's health and then introduce evidence showing how vaccines contribute to long-term well-being. The chapter also explores the role of cognitive dissonance, the psychological discomfort people experience when confronted with information that contradicts their beliefs. Duhigg highlights that people tend to avoid cognitive dissonance by doubling down on their existing views, which is why direct confrontation is rarely effective. Instead, the key to shifting perspectives is to create a safe space where individuals feel they can update their beliefs without feeling like they are betraying their identity. By the end of the chapter, Duhigg offers practical strategies for engaging in conversations where social identity plays a major role. He emphasizes the importance of listening with genuine curiosity, avoiding language that triggers defensiveness, and finding ways to frame discussions around shared values. He provides examples of successful interventions where people were able to change minds not through debate, but through trust building and respectful dialogue. Ultimately, the chapter argues that understanding social identity is crucial for effective communication. By recognizing how identity shapes beliefs and behaviors, individuals can approach difficult conversations with greater empathy and strategic insight, leading to more productive and meaningful interactions. Chapter 7. How do we make the hardest conversations safer? The problem Netflix lives with. This chapter delves into the complexities of discussing race, prejudice, and power dynamics in organizations, using Netflix as a case study to highlight the challenges and missteps that occur when tackling sensitive conversations. The author, Charles Duhigg, acknowledges the difficulty of addressing racial issues as a white man who has benefited from numerous privileges. To mitigate the risk of overlooking important perspectives, he consulted scholars and experts on racism and interracial communication, incorporating their insights into the chapter. He emphasizes that while various forms of prejudice share similarities, each is distinct. Racism, sexism, and homophobia, for example, have unique manifestations and impacts. The chapter examines a controversial incident at Netflix, where a high-ranking executive used a racial slur during a discussion about offensive language. Although he did not use it in a derogatory manner, merely mentioning the word led to significant backlash, eventually resulting in his termination. This incident exemplifies the deep sensitivities surrounding racial discussions and the consequences of failing to navigate them appropriately. Netflix, known for its culture of radical transparency, found itself struggling to balance open communication with the realities of racial discourse, where context and intent often take a backseat to emotional and historical significance. Duhigg explores the concept of microaggressions, subtle, often unintentional discriminatory remarks or behaviors that contribute to workplace tensions. He references psychological studies showing that even well-intentioned individuals can inadvertently perpetuate biases, making it imperative for organizations to cultivate environments where employees feel safe discussing difficult topics without fear of reprisal. The chapter argues that dismissing people for verbal missteps, rather than fostering constructive dialogue, can create an atmosphere of fear rather than learning. Netflix's experience serves as a cautionary tale of how corporate cultures that prioritize blunt honesty can clash with the nuanced realities of racial and social dynamics. The chapter also outlines strategies for making difficult conversations safer and more productive. One key takeaway is that organizations should focus on intent rather than solely on the words used, encouraging employees to ask clarifying questions before assuming malice. Additionally, Duhigg suggests that structured training on racial issues should not be about punishment, but about equipping employees with the tools to engage in meaningful discourse. He highlights the importance of acknowledging mistakes, allowing room for growth, and fostering an atmosphere where employees feel heard rather than policed. A broader takeaway from the chapter is that conversations about race and power require both emotional intelligence and strategic thinking. Companies like Netflix, which thrive on open communication, must recognize that some topics demand a different approach, one that prioritizes empathy, historical awareness, and the ability to differentiate between ignorance and intent. The ultimate goal should be to create environments where employees can engage in these discussions honestly without fear of being misunderstood or unfairly judged. Now that you know the secrets to supercommunication, which one will you use first? Comment below. For more powerful insights, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. See you in the next one.